Hello, everyone, and welcome to the premiere of Stockton. I'm Dick Stockton. This is the first of my podcasts, and I'm excited to be doing these because as a play-by-play guy, which is how most of you know me, I don't really get the chance to sit down and talk with athletes or coaches or anyone in and around the world of sports too often. So with Stockton, all that changes because that's exactly the sort of thing I'll be doing with every episode, sitting down and talking in depth, one-on-one with a guest. Plus, I'll be sharing my experiences, insights, and stories, and I have a lot of those from a more than 40-year career in sports broadcasting. I think it'll be engaging, interesting, and above all, I think there'll be some entertaining moments as well. So I hope you'll subscribe and come along for the ride. Now, to subscribe, all you have to do is go to iTunes and sign up. It doesn't cost a thing, and you'll always know when the latest episode gets posted. Plus, I want you to leave a review because your opinion really does matter to me, and it helps shape what we do going forward. And that's the other thing that really excites me about doing this podcast, is that it gives me a chance to connect with all of you, and I really want to hear from you. So if you have a comment, a suggestion for a guest or topic, or just want to say hello, send us an email, please. And believe me, we read every email. But send it to info@StocktonPodcast.com. Check out our website, www.StocktonPodcast.com. Now, no matter what the subject of my podcast episode, at the end of every one of them, I'm going to do a feature called Taking Stock, where I'll give you my opinion on a topic that I think is worthy of a deeper dive. Now, for this episode of Taking Stock, I want to look back at one of the greatest golfers ever to play the game. You know who that is, Arnold Palmer, who passed away last year. So at the end of this episode, for reasons I think you'll understand in a few moments, I'll share a story about Arnold Palmer, and I know it's one you've never heard because it's personal. But I know it'll give you a glimpse into the kind of man he was, both on the course and off. And that'll come a bit later in Taking Stock. First, however, you probably know me most from my years behind the mic and in the booth broadcasting games on various networks while covering the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball and so on. But I want you to get to know a little bit more about me away from the games. And to help with that, it's a pleasure to welcome to the podcast the host of E60 Reports, who was the 2015 winner of the prestigious Robert F. Kennedy Award. He's a two-time winner of the National Edward R. Murrow Award, a two-time winner of the National Headliner Award, and an 11-time National Sports Emmy Award winner. He's also the author of New York Times bestselling book Cinderella Man, James J. Braddock, Max Baer, and the greatest upset in boxing history, and Triumph, the untold story of Jesse Owens and Hitler's Olympics. He is Jeremy Schaap. Jeremy, thanks for joining me for this episode. And even though you're the guest, you're going to take over the hosting duties by interviewing me. And by being interviewed by such a respected journalist is humbling to me. Amazing, a true journalist in our profession. And you actually have been doing what I originally wanted to do. But I want to make a quick comment, if I can, to relate to you an experience I have never forgotten. It was 1994, and on the media plane to the Winter Olympics in Norway, I was fortunate to sit next to your legendary father, Dick Stockton, in what was a 9 or 10 hour flight from JFK to Oslo turned into a puddle jumper for me. A short flight. Talking with your dad. Well, maybe we dozed off a bit, but not much. And I always wanted to tell you how lucky I was to be sitting next to him at that time. So now, just so everyone knows, I know Jeremy has a bunch of questions, none of which I have seen, not from politics, not so long ago. Anyways, not anything rehearsed or scripted, so as the saying goes, what you hear is what you get. So let's get started, Jeremy.
Dick, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be on the show, to get a chance to talk to you about your storied career. I remember my father telling me about that flight you guys had together to Norway. I remember I was at those Olympics as well. Like you, I was working for CBS, but in a much less exalted position. I was a writer on one of the shows, and my dad was there for ABC and ESPN. And he was a guy who loved the Olympics, as you know, and he wrote a history of the Olympics, but he hated the Lillehammer Olympics. They were my favorite Olympics. They were the favorite Olympics of almost everybody I know, but he hated them because it was all about Nancy and Tanya, and he couldn't stand covering that story, which interested him not in the least. But it was such an idyllic site for the games. There was so much uplifting stuff that went on, as well as that horrible soap opera with Nancy and Tanya, not to mention the violence that had preceded it. I want to ask you, though, before we get to the Olympics and the NBA and the NFL, when you were growing up, what was the sport and who were the athletes that mesmerized you?
Baseball. It was the only sport to me, Jeremy. The others were fillers. And my dad had season tickets. He was in the printing business, so he had season tickets at the Polo Grounds where the New York Giants played. And he would take me to about 15 games a year. He didn't have every game. He had Sundays and night games and holidays and opening day. And they were box seats, and we would get there and watch batting practice. And I remember he used to buy baseball cards. These were Bowman. This is before Topps dominated the industry of baseball cards. It was Bowman cards, and he used to bring home cards, and I used to take that one slab of bubble gum off the top card and get the powder of the bubble gum off and look at the players. They were really drawings, but off of photographs. And then when I went to the Polo Grounds and saw the St. Louis Cardinals and saw Shane Deans, number 2, and remember what the picture looked like on the cards, I was hooked. And so basically baseball was the sport, and my dad brought 8 newspapers home. We lived in Forest Hills, suburb of New York. He brought 8 newspapers home, and we would analyze columnists and writers and how they covered things. And that's really, when I was 8 years old, Jeremy, I knew I wanted to be a sports writer, believe it or not.
When you were 8?
8.
You'd already set your sights that low. You wanted to be in the sports business.
I thought it was exalted at the time. I thought being a sports writer, can you imagine being Arthur Daly, Jimmy Cannon, Dick Young, a lot of names that a lot of the listeners will say, who are they? Well, your dad, of course, was also one of them back then, or even after that, I should say. But those were the regal people of communications and sports reporting. Now,
you said your dad brought home all those city newspapers, and there were so many back then. But growing up in Forest Hills at the home, the time of the United States Tennis Championships, it wasn't yet the U.S. Open. Were you a tennis guy as well?
I went all 10 days of the Nationals, as they were called. And the West Side Tennis Club, probably the closest thing at the time to what Wimbledon is even today, a triangular-shaped area where the courts expanded and they had the big oval where they played. This was the heart of the Australian domination of tennis. Lou Hode, Ken Rosewall, great. Harry Hopman was the coach of the team, and that's when Rod Laver started to make his debut along with Neil Frazier, Ashley
Roy
Cooper,
Emerson.
Malcolm Anderson. Yes, Roy Emerson, Emo, yes. All part of the Harry Hopman dynasty of the Australian tennis. But yes, 10 days smelling that great grass. The top American players were Vic Seixas and Tony Trabert. And actually, they won a Davis Cup in the late 50s in Australia, beating the Aussies, a big upset.
So you were a baseball guy primarily, and you were
Yes.
a Giants fan, frequently at the Polo Grounds. Just a couple months ago, I was interviewing Vin Scully. He was talking about how he was a Giants fan as a kid, although he was a kid from the Bronx, and he had another team, obviously, in the Bronx he could have rooted for. But he was a Giants fan. You were in Queens, much closer to the Dodgers, but you were a Giants fan. Is there something about the Giants, being a fan of the Giants, that lends itself to calling play-by-play?
Well, I don't know. I just thought that, my dad was a Giant fan, so I was a Giant fan. And we learned to hate the Dodgers and hate the Yankees as well, because that's what happened in those days. And I remember that, I don't know whether that meant anything. I know they broke my heart when they moved to San Francisco in 1958. So, but I 2 glorious years as a fan in a short span. That was in 1951 when Bobby Thompson hit the famed shot heard round the world to give the Giants the pennant in the third and final playoff game against the Dodgers. And then again in 1954 when, as huge underdogs against a team that won 111 games, Cleveland Indians, the Giants swept the Indians to win the World Series. But 4 years later, they're gone. But I don't know if there was any connection. I love the Polo Grounds. I love the way it looked. I got to see Willie Mays make that catch. I was there for the first game of the 54 World Series when my dad says, look, you better get up on this chair if you want to see anything. And sure enough, I was up on the chair long enough to see the catch made by Willie. But I don't know if there's any connection, but that was the team I liked. And when they moved to San Francisco, that was it for me as far as rooting for any team.
So when the Mets then occupied the Polo Grounds, when they came to life in 1962, you did not transfer your allegiance to the new National League franchise in New York?
Great question. No, I did not. You know why, Jeremy? Because they were mostly Dodger. They picked up the Dodger fandom. I think that's what happened. And, the Giant fans were, an eclectic bunch. George Raft was a Giant fan.
The great movie
Tallulah
Mobster.
Bankhead. Yeah, a mobster, right. Tallulah Bankhead, who was a redheaded siren, was a Giants fan. But the Dodger fans were Ebbets Field. They were the come on bums. We love the bums. The Dodger Symphony when they used to play at Ebbets Field, that little bandbox, or I called it a phone booth. And the Yankees,
I've always
of course,
felt if I had been alive at the time, I think, Dick, I would have been a Giants fan too. I was born in Manhattan. I grew up in Manhattan.
See?
My father, my mother, they were all Dodgers fans. They were from Brooklyn, but as a Manhattan kid, they played uptown. I don't know. There's something, and they had the history. Yeah. I mean, even a greater history, obviously, than the Dodgers.
Yeah, my dad got to see Carl Hubbell strike out, 5 straight,
he was at the All-Star
American
game.
Leaguers. Yeah, the 1934 All-Star game. You saw that. And, it shows you I said, Dad, 1934, Carl Hubbell. Who was he?
Wow.
And he was the farm director at the time. But and the Yankees were all General Motors. The Yankees were, the top corporation, whatever they were at the time.
My grandfather, my family, they were all Brooklyn people. But my grandfather, whose favorite players were most Zach Weed and Dazzy Vance from the Dodgers of the teens and the 20s, there was still a reverence for Christy Mathewson. He kind of transcended baseball. Mm-hmm. He was the ultimate gentleman, kind of Jack Armstrong. When you get your start in the business out of Syracuse University, where's the first place you go?
Well, I worked as a copy boy at WINS, which was one of the Westinghouse Group W stations. They had decided to hire me out of college, and they wanted me for management training. They think he said, Dick, you're going to be a great manager of a radio station or a sales manager. And I said, but I'd like to try to on the air. And they said, well, we have no room to go on the air. We have disc jockeys here, Murray DeKay, and we have Stan Z. Burns. But all of a sudden they went all news, and that was the start. And so I got to start at KYW in Philadelphia doing all-night radio news. That was my very first commercial job. I worked from 10:30 at night to 6:30 in the morning doing half-hour newscasts at midnight, 2, 4, and 6 a.m., 6 nights a week. And, man, they paid me $200. What a great job.
Was play-by-play the goal?
Never. I never thought of myself, Jeremy, as doing play-by-play, even though I grew up listening to Russ Hodges and Ernie Harwell do Giant games, Red Barber and Vin Scully doing Dodger games, Mel Allen and Jim Woods doing Yankee games, and Marty Glickman, of course, was on doing all of the Knicks and college basketball and New York Giant football games. Never thought of myself doing play-by-play because my first tour of duty was doing the radio news, and then I did weekend television sports in Philadelphia, and then I went to Pittsburgh doing 6 and 11. I did some play-by-play because the Rooneys took a liking to me, and they hired me to do their preseason games, but play-by-play didn't come into effect until I was in Boston. And I was hired by a great fellow named Win Baker, who was really my first mentor. He wanted me to do commentaries on television on my sports shows, criticizing Now, everyone does it now. But he wanted me to write commentaries criticizing teams, criticizing players, not all the time, but most of the time. I would walk into the press box at Boston, at Fenway Park, for example. People would look at me out of the corner of their eyes. That's the guy that knocks everyone. And I said to myself, I grew up loving sports, so maybe play-by-play is the kind of thing that I want to do. And ultimately, I left the station and I went to New York to freelance without a job to do play-by-play. And I got some work at home box office. Marty Glickman was responsible for that. And I started to do some CBS play-by-play, and the rest is kind of history.
I mean, it's a remarkable story because so many of the giants of play-by-play, such as yourself, kind of knew almost like in the womb, Mozart-like, what they were going to do. It's what they trained themselves to do. It's what they focused on. It's what they practiced. Many of them were prodigies. But for you, it's almost accidental. How do you think that has had an impact on your perspective as a play-by-play guy?
Interesting. I feel that deep down, I wanted to be a sports writer. I went to Syracuse University. They didn't have the Newhouse School of Communications, where so many broadcasters are flooding the field and are all excellent. And many, many of them, and I do too. And the thing is that I didn't go there to become a broadcaster at all. I wanted to write for the Daily Orange, and I did. And so what's happened is that the aspect of journalism has always been in the back of my mind and a keynote. That's why, again, I got to tell you, I respect true journalists now, and there hasn't been many formats in networks where journalism becomes the key. Bob Lee and yourself, and there are very few who are really doing journalism. That is what I wanted to do, but I have taken it into my play-by-play work, Jeremy, and I always, when I'm ready to do a football game and I'm saying, okay, what's the story here? What's the lead? What's the who, what, where, why, when, and how? And I try to treat it like I'm a reporter covering it as if I were a sports writer, not just saying, wow, what a play. Look at that run. And I want to be able to describe it, although, television is about pictures, so I'm not talking, hopefully, too much. But at least in setting up the game, what is the game all about? What is the story about? And that's never left me, whatever sport I've covered.
Well, what was that game about, that situation about, the meaning of it all in October 1975 at Fenway Park?
Rain had postponed the sixth game of the World Series for several days. And so finally, when they ended up playing Game 6, most of the media were saying, let's get this over with already, because it was dragging on. And there's been other series that had the same thing. I mean, the earthquake situation between the Giants and the A's, and of course the Yankees and the Giants had a lot of rain back in 1962. But now this was a series in which I think people were, almost had enough. The Reds were leading 3-2, and could the Red Sox survive and send it to a seventh game? And I think that going in, baseball was in a slump. The A's had won 3 straight World Series, and of course, not to take anything away from that very colorful team, but the series were not exciting. There might have been one 7-game series. I think there was a 5. Anyway, baseball was like dragging. And that game, because of the building of the drama, really invigorated and ignited the sport, I think, again. And I think people will say, hey, that 6th game was the igniter of it. It ended up in 7 games, and of course the Reds won, but Carlton Fisk home run. The interesting thing of my experience, Jeremy, about covering games live is that you really don't know the impact right away. And that's why it rankles me sometimes to hear people say at the end of it, this is going to go down as one of the greatest games of all. And I really don't like hearing that, because I think things only in time, they build up time. So Fisk's home run that night set the World Series to a 7th game. It was dramatic, but only in time, and maybe because of the replay of him willing the ball to stay fair, that great shot from the scoreboard at Fenway Park. it built up momentum and became great as the years went on. So I think you can't always know at the moment how great it is. I think it takes some time.
And you were a kid. How did you come to be in the booth at that moment? You were not a national play-by-play guy at that point in time.
No, I wasn't. But in those days, and I love this, NBC that had the World Series would always bring in a broadcaster from each team, which I thought was good because we had Kurt Gowdy, Tony Kubek, and Joe Garagiola. They were the NBC guys who did the game of the week. But they bring in Marty Brennaman, they bring in myself, and we lend a perspective. We're not, the network. I wasn't a network broadcaster really at that time, but we lend a perspective into the team we have seen. And I felt that because we had seen our team 162 games, both Marty with the Reds and myself, that we actually knew the teams better than the network announcers. That's not a knock because I always felt that way when I was doing national games. I said, the local guy knows the team better than I do. I'm flying in and flying out. I'm coming in and maybe I'm doing my homework, but it's not the same. They know it. And so I think NBC was sharp enough to bring people in to do that, to enhance the broadcast. So that's what I and Marty Brennaman were able to lend to the telecast, to the series.
But you weren't necessarily going to be working the extra innings. That was Gowdy's idea, right?
Gowdy was one of the great mentors to me, Jeremy. But Garagiola was working television with Kubek and myself in that sixth game. And for years, it's funny, I always said, it had to be Kurt Gowdy because Kurt Gowdy was such a great mentor. He would tell you anything that you needed to know. Unlike, and you know our business a little bit, you don't always find that with veteran broadcasters who don't want to help young people, but Kurt Gowdy did. But it was Joe Garagiola. And so what they said was, before the game, look, this is a series, that could be won by the Reds tonight. So we would like to have the NBC voice, if the Reds win, do the last 4.5 innings. So instead of Joe starting and you finishing, we want to reverse it. You'll do the first 4.5, and then Joe will do the last 4.5 with Kubek in the booth. And of course, it was fine with me. I was just so glad to be there. And then, lo and behold, it's 6-6, and we go to extra innings. And now what do? And one of the NBC executives, I think it was either Carl Lindemann or Chet Simmons, said, we'll just alternate innings. We'll go back to Dick do 10, and we'll keep doing it that way. Joe will do 11, and then we'll keep going that way. It was just the luck of the draw and good fortune that I was at the mic at the 12th inning when Fisk, leading off, hit the home run to win the game. And I often say to myself today that knowing some of the egos that we have in our business, whether that could ever happen again.
Never. The answer is never, Dick. How did the call change your life?
Well, you're just doing the batter. I mean, Carlton Fisk is coming out, and a lot of people have said to me, well, you must have been really excited, a great moment here. When you're doing a play-by-play of a broadcast and people say, well, you're rooting for this team, you're concentrating so much on getting it right, on getting the facts right, on using the right words. I mean, it's a blank canvas, and you're filling the words, using the pictures and your partner. You have no time to really sit back and think about it. So you have to react. And I've always said this, preparation is one thing in getting ready to do a game, but reaction is the key. Al Michaels' great reaction, do you believe in miracles? That was off the cuff. It just came to him. So, and not to compare this call to that one, but here's Fisk, and now Fisk hits a line drive. It's the toughest call that you can make in a game because, as you know, you can hit a long drive, and the announcer can say, there's a long drive, way back, could be, and then the guy goes crazy, and it's a home run. But now this is a line shot down the left field line. You have no time to rhapsodize over a long fly ball. And so there's a shot down the left field line. And so it just comes out. If it stays fair, there's a drive. If it stays fair, home run. That's exactly what had happened in like 2 seconds. What did it do? I think when the World Series was over, NBC, and I was a youngster at the time, said, you did a good job and maybe you can do some other things for us. And I began to do some NFL football for them, some college basketball playoffs. And what it did was we had the call. It was I was so blessed to have Dick Stockton doing a call of one of the great home runs of all time, and it really set the tone for what I've become, really. And I've never forgotten it, obviously.
When you're in a moment like that, you said you're just reacting, you're just trying to get it right, and there's so little time, particularly in that kind of a situation, to get it right, to build up drama. You just have to do it. Looking back at it, does it amaze you that you were able to seize the moment in the way that you did, and as such a young guy with so much pressure and so many millions of people watching, not screw it up? Because a lot of people would have.
Well, I don't know. I think people would have handled it. Maybe they would have had a different kind of call or whatever. But and it's a tremendous question, because people assume that you're caught up in a big event and that your adrenaline is at its height, and it's the opposite. And I've always told young broadcasters this: the bigger the game, the calmer you become, and the lower key you become. That doesn't mean you don't give it excitement when it's called for. This has nothing to do with raising the level of your voice in a big moment. But when you're calm in a big game, you're going to be strong enough and steady enough to do the right thing. If you lose yourself in utter excitement, that's where you lose control. And so for some reason, I've always been blessed with the fact that I have never let myself get high or low, depending on how a game is going, depending on the excitement of what's building. And I look to, to me, one of the greats of all time, Pat Summerall. Pat had a strong, penetrating voice. He never had to raise his voice. And when he spoke and didn't scream, you got shivers. And of course, that came after I was there, but I was always feeling that if you are in control, you have a better chance of getting it right.
Dick, what is it? I mean, I've never done play-by-play. I've been a sports announcer for a long time, but play-by-play isn't what I do. It's not what my father did. He never did it. The closest I ever came to doing it was calling a chess match. But I watch a lot of sports, like so many of us. When you hear someone who's really good at it, is there what distinguishes, I should say, the people who are the greats from everyone else?
I have to compliment you again on the question, because I've never been asked that before. Immediately, I can hear someone for 5 minutes, a young broadcaster for 5 minutes, and say, he's got it. The good ones have the judgment of pacing. They have the judgment of inflection. They have a vocabulary. They're in control of the broadcast. And I can tell immediately if someone is trying to do too much, or is someone trying to impress, or if a play-by-play announcer thinks for 1 second that he is what the game is all about. And so all of the great ones, from Vin Scully to Al Michaels to Marv Albert, I didn't want to start naming names and Pat Summerall, there are others, and I don't, it's wrong to do this, but I'm just going to name a few here of several, not a lot, and they all have that same trait.
When a young broadcaster comes up to you, and I know so many people, having worked in the business for a long time, it's all they want to do. They want to be Dick Stockton. They want to be Joe Buck. They want to be Vern Lundquist. They want to call big games. They want to call championships, and they work so hard for it. Can you make yourself a great play-by-play person, or does some of that talent, as it is in sports, have to be innate?
I think it has to be innate. Jeremy, you're a brilliant journalist. You didn't force yourself to become that. Of course, you learned from the best, but if you didn't have it, you couldn't have become that. I think it's innate. It can be developed and honed and polished as you go along, but I think that you have to have that talent. I think Marv had it. I think Al had it. I think it is. I think you can't all of a sudden become a great play-by-play announcer or a great anything in our business, I think you have to have an innate feeling about that. And before we're done, I want to discuss one more thing from the '94 Olympics that you were talking about. But I digress. You go on.
No. You named some of the greats, Marv and Michaels and Scully. They are widely acknowledged as among the all-time greats, as you are. Who is underappreciated? And I know that's a sensitive question because it suggests that somebody, that it might hurt someone's feelings to know that you think they haven't gotten the credit they deserve, or it might make them feel good. I guess my point is, let me clarify that. So those are some of the obvious, universally acknowledged greats. Who is someone who perhaps our listeners have never heard of, who you consider a genius of play-by-play calling?
Well, I don't have anyone who's been doing it for a long time, because the way our business works, they wouldn't be underappreciated. They'd be given the exposure. And we know, who a lot of these broadcasters are, who have been waiting in the wings and now finally getting their chance. So I don't think that's a case. I happen to know a real young broadcaster who does work for Fox on college football and started with the L.A. Dodgers, named Joe Davis. A lot of people may never have heard of Joe Davis, but he is one person and who I think has the makings. Now, I'm not saying there's genius, but I think has the makings of becoming, really, really good in the business. But that's as far as I could go, I think, on this.
What's the hardest sport to call?
Well, I think I've never done horse racing. I think that would be really tough to do.
You mean the actual race call? Yeah, that's
correct. Yeah.
That's an art form. I mean, that's a specialization, like being an auctioneer or something. You can't just walk into that, I assume. I
think, Jeremy, believe it or not, I think football may be as difficult a sport. And and everyone says, well, no, it has to be hockey. It has to be basketball. Look how fast it is. When a sport is rapid, you just roll with it. You say, you would just do the commentary of, Bird to McHale, inside Parrish, and he gets to, okay, well, what easy, okay? That's easy. When you're doing football and you're the play-by-play announcer and it's 2nd and 10 and the play is a few seconds and over quickly, it better be the right call, better be the right identification, better be the right tone, and then you get out for the analyst to come in. And your tone and storytelling has to be concise, which is what made Summerall so great, I think, and Michaels too. They don't get in the way of the game. It's very tough, for young announcers to be told not to get in the way of the game. Okay, I'm doing the game. No, don't get in the way of the game, especially in television when you have pictures, you have sound, shots. They tell the story more than any words you can use. So that's what I feel. I think football can be the toughest.
Dick, I really could do this all day and would enjoy doing so. But I know that there's a reasonable time limit here, and you wanted to wrap things up. What else would you like to say?
Well, what I'd like to say is that I think it's fitting that you're talking to me about the business, because journalism is what I've always hung my hat on, even in doing play-by-play. And in all the years that I have done various sports and been around sporting people, I always looked at them in those terms. What was Greg Popovich about? Tony La Russa? And look at them in terms of words, not necessarily just actions. And so, I'm so, pleased and honored and thrilled to be doing a podcast that I can tie in, 40 plus years of covering sports and watching sports figures, seeing the way things have evolved over the years to what we have today. A lot of similarities, a lot of changes, a lot of things more the same than people imagine. And to be able to talk about that, play-by-play is one thing, but to be able to do what I intend to do on this podcast is to expand and use my thoughts, a lot of which we've discussed here, to make things interesting for the listeners.
Well, it has been a true pleasure. It is an honor to be even a small part of this. And anytime you need me for anything, I am at your beck and call.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's fine. And I want to tie this thing up the way we started. I talked about the flight to
Yes.
Oslo for the 94 Olympics with your dad. You were, of course, there too, working for CBS. But like you and he, the figure skating scenario, I didn't have to deal with that either. And I never got to see any of it because I was covering speed skating. So I was with the great Eric Houghton. Eric and I were at the Viking ship in Hamar in Norway. And we followed the trail of Bonnie Blair and Dan Jansen, and a dramatic moment when Dan Jansen finally won the gold medal. So the 94 Olympics was great as far as I was concerned. But Jeremy, I'm so pleased that we were able to talk, and we'll do it again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dick. It was really a pleasure.
I mentioned that we would have this extra added attraction called Taking Stock at the end of every one of my podcasts. And so as I previewed at the beginning, we were going to share a story about Arnold Palmer, who passed away, one of the great icons of all-time sports. Well, as a 24-year-old newcomer to broadcasting, I was working at KDKA in Pittsburgh. This is a television shot, the first one I ever had. And I once had a wild idea, and why not do an interview with one of the great Pittsburgh athletes who resided in suburban Pittsburgh, and that was Arnold Palmer for my sports segment on the evening news. So how to go about it? Well, I knew he had a middleman, a right-hand man, Doc Giffen, who was a former sports writer himself. I called Doc Giffen up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and asked him, thinking I had no shot, could I interview Arnold Palmer? And within a day, Giffen said that Arnold would be delighted and to come up to Latrobe, to the country club there, to interview Arnold Palmer in his office. Now, this was virtually at the height of his career, so I expected, a few quick minutes with this busy guy, and off I would go. But Arnold Palmer treated me as if I was the most important man he would meet, and we proceeded to do a lengthy interview. It might have been close to a half hour that would fill a 5-part series on my broadcast. And he showed me around his office at Latrobe Country Club, including his garage, where he stored hundreds of putters of all sizes and shapes. He was tremendous. He gave me time, a valuable asset to a man of his stature and whirlwind schedule. And he was no different to this young reporter than he was to everyone who crossed his path. And I've always felt in my travels that the people of Pittsburgh, by the way, were the most genuinely kind, caring, and friendly folks I have ever come across. Arnold Palmer was the first. In my experience, meeting him back in 1967 was the initial thought I had when this legendary human being passed away not long ago. Just seemed he didn't disappoint anyone. And want to remind you to be sure to subscribe to Stockton on iTunes and leave a review. Stockton is produced by Collisions, the podcast division of CRN International. Collisions, podcasts for curious people. Thanks to our producer, Peter Lyon, and our engineer, Scott Person. And thanks for joining us. Till next time, Dick Stockton wishing you all the best. So long, everybody.